Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. It is I, RaiinBow Reads. Hi, how are ya? Today we are going to read The Creation of the Monster FrankenPooh. It was sent to me as a sultry adult request to do naughty things to it, but this is so random and not even sexy that I am going to read it out to you. It is actually a literary description of an episode of Winnie the Pooh, and yeah, why don't we dive into this? And I hope that your isolation is going well. Now, this article is by Schmitty 1551 on DeviantArt. That's who the user who it comes from, and it's so random. It's really random. Very random. So let's take a read here on RaiinBow Reads. Piglet succeeded to Tigger's trickery. His bright, white, middle-of-the-day story had suddenly become very dark night. Oh, Piglet whimpered. Tigger, eager to keep his version of the story going, had himself another idea. That's better. Hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Tigger laughed to himself. Although a nice thunderstorm wouldn't hurt, he said, as dark storm clouds began to shroud the castle, which was followed by a loud thunderclap and a downpour of heavy rain. Tigger smiled in delight, as the story was just about the right amount of scary for a not-so-scary story. But Piglet would not be denied his story. He shook off Tigger's minor edits and continued with his. Yes, as I was saying, Piglet went on, this was a very pleasant and cheerful scientist. Inside the castle was a very large laboratory where Dr. Von Piglet, a very small piglet-looking scientist, was fiddling with a knife over an operating table. The scientist swung the knife upwards and then brought it down heavily, and with fine precision smeared a glob of something sticky onto the surface of the operating table. Triumphantly, Dr. Von Piglet had held up his scientific creation. The scientist said with delight. Peanut butter and jelly, my favorite. Dr. Von Piglet took a bite of his sandwich and smiled. It's so very good for you, too. For a little bit, Piglet felt like he had gotten his story back. I said store it. Keck. Guessed Tigger, almost sarcastically. He was getting a little tired of Piglet's version of the story. Suddenly, the scientist, overcome with fear, scurried under the operating table and wrapped himself in a little bit of the blanket that was draped over it. What is it? What is it? The scientist cried. What is it? Tigger, who took a small bit of delight from Dr. Von Piglet's fear, chortled. Why is this story so unscary? It's scary, said Tigger, incredibly coldly and sarcastically. He was very fed up with the story at this point. I got better things to do than listen to this, he said harshly. Piglet's ears drooped a little. I think I'll go trim my toenails, Tigger said. Or better yet, I'll go trim Pooh's toenails, he added, gesturing away from the group and getting up from the stuffed armchair that he, Rabbit, and Gopher were sitting in. Oh, Tigger, where are your manners? Rabbit asked, grabbing Tigger's arm, trying to get him to stay. I don't know, Tigger responded. I bet they're having more fun than I am, and began to walk away. Tigger, behave, scolded Rabbit, determined to get Tigger to listen to Piglet's story. Tigger finally, at his last nerve, pleaded his case. Well, if you're going to have a story about a scientist, said Tigger hastily, he ought to be doing something terrible. Suddenly, there was a crash of lightning from the electric generators in Dr. Von Piglet's laboratory. There was a whirring of different machines as their screens flashed and all of the buttons of all colors lit up. like creating a boogie monster, Tigger said ominously, as sparks of lightning continued to flash between the large purple orbs high above Dr. Von Piglet's head. Piblet. Is Piblet a word? The small scientist suddenly became more frightened than usual and began to look around the laboratory, afraid something might jump out at him. Monster? He said in a very not so hopeful that the story was going to go his way sort of voice. The scientist backed away slowly, and when he noticed something underneath the green blanket on the operating table that wasn't there before, something lying still underneath the blanket now. It looked almost like it had a nose, 2 feet, and a big round belly. Suddenly, the figure on the table began to move. Yeah, Tigger confirmed. The monster FrankenPooh. The figure underneath the blanket sat up very slowly, revealing 2 ears and 2 arms. As it sat up, it came with a long, eerie creaking sound. Oh, dear, whimpered Piglet, who inched away even farther from the ominous figure, in which he had deducted must be the monster Tigger was talking about. Suddenly, the blanket on top of the monster FrankenPooh was pulled off to reveal a very non-threatening-looking bear who bore a very striking resemblance to Winnie the Pooh, complete with red shirt, very similar to Pooh's. The scientist looked up at FrankenPooh with mixed feelings. Pooh? A monster? The scientist thought. FrankenPooh, unaware of his surroundings, began to look around the room. Tigger laughed. Absolutely perfect. Admiring the Pooh-looking monster. Just then, Tigger noticed something was off about FrankenPooh, who was still looking around the room with innocent, obvious grin. Oh, only he ought to be a little bit bigger than that. Suddenly, Pooh began to feel a tingle around his parts. From his chest out towards his limbs, the monster began to rise up off the table, almost an uncontrolled jump, as his head expanded onwards and outwards, followed by his arms that stayed akimbo at the elbow, but was expanded onward from the shoulders. Excuse me one moment. And his torso and legs, which seemed to shoot outward, as his growth-induced levitation reached its peak. His rapid growth was accompanied by what seemed like an expanding rubber, which grew sharply in intensity as his legs shot outward from the bottom of his torso. As his expansion came to close, the monster landed on the table with a loud thump. The scientist ran over to FrankenPooh, who was now more than twice, even more than 3 times his original size, almost the whole size of Piglet's living room. He saw that the table that the monster had been lying on was now minuscule compared to FrankenPooh's size. It looked like it was going to give way to the monster's weight at any moment. FrankenPooh and Piglet shared eye contact for a brief moment, the monster looking down from a much higher vantage point at the small scientist. The scientist looked back in awe at the monster. Tigger, however, was not pleased with the monster's size. No, even bigger, he said. The monster felt the sensation again flow throughout his body into his limbs. FrankenPooh's bent legs shot outward and elongated. The scientist ducked out of the way, and the monster's sharply growing feet and legs. His arms seemed to pump inward towards his belly, which widened at his elbows and took up even more space. His torso and head shot upward and outwards towards the sky, as if some visible force was pulling them. The feeling that only lasted for a second, but there was a difference in FrankenPooh's size, as he was now roughly the size of a small house. The monster was now forced to stand as the table he was sitting had finally collapsed underneath him. He was almost as high as the electrical generators in the laboratory. The bewildered FrankenPooh glanced around the laboratory, examining his now even more massive self. Pooh is just a growing here, guys. Boys, he's a growing. And a hint of nervousness overtook his face. The scientists looked up in terror. Oh, dear, thought Piglet. The monster's really big. Hopefully he won't make him any bigger, commanded Tigger, still displeased with the size of his monster FrankenPooh, who was already very close to taking up more space than the laboratory could handle. Once again, FrankenPooh felt another tingling sensation as his elbows were thrown towards the sky, his arms following. He seemed to dip for a second. As his torso and belly took a second to widen as he grew, FrankenPooh's eyes widened and his jaw gaped as the feeling took hold of his face and head, making them expand outward. The scientist backed away slightly and continued to look upward as the monster grew towards the ceiling of the castle. His right leg grew in its place, but seemed to take the left one with it, which was brought out from behind the corner of the table and underneath him. Okay. The monster began to reach the top of the inside of the castle, as his ever-growing shoulders pushed away from the electrical generators and sparking lights. FrankenPooh's immense size and height finally caused the ceiling to give way, and a gaping hole formed, while debris littered the floor before. FrankenPooh's left foot met the ground with a huge stomp, shaking the ground, and his right foot followed to catch this balance. "Oh, bother," said a new, enlarged, very confused FrankenPooh, who was examining the damage to the ceiling of the castle, as well as his massive body. The monster was so big he could hardly see the scientist, who looked like a very small animal from that height. "Now that's what I call a monster," said Tigger with satisfaction, admiring the now enormous Winnie the Pooh Bear, who was at least the size of a tall tree. Tigger laughed with pleasure. "Hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo!" The scientist, overwhelmed with fright, began to run wildly around the monster FrankenPooh's feet, even running between the monster's legs, which were as big as a tree trunks. "Oh, help," he cried. "Save me. Help me. Oh, save me. Oh, dear, this is very terrifying." The scientist had led the scene, leaving the monster FrankenPooh alone with himself in the laboratory. The monster FrankenPooh stood there for a moment, and then after a moment of scratching his now oversized poo ears, finally reached a monstrous conclusion. He began to move his legs as if to walk, but did it very slowly as his limbs were just reawakening after his massive 3-stage growth spurt. Each leg made a squeaking sound as he brought each foot down. It shook the ground behind him. But the monster FrankenPooh didn't notice that. He was only focused on one thing. I want honey?" he said in a voice so loud that even he surprised himself. And with that, the monster FrankenPooh has left the laboratory. Although, how he did it without breaking anything still remains a mystery. And that is our lovely story of the creation of the monster of FrankenPooh. I have no idea what the fuck I just read. If you like my really shitty reading videos, go ahead and smash that like button and turn on your notifications to all, because you want to see my beautiful face all of the time. If you want to support my channel, go ahead and follow me on Twitter, and go ahead and subscribe to me on Patreon, where you can give me money so I can buy better shit, so I can read better things. Recommendedly, I would love to make enough money to buy Onision's couple of books, so I can read that to you in installments of chapters. Literary garbage. Also, if you like anything else that I do, feel free to leave a comment below where we can talk about other things that I'll do for videos. If you like my makeup, refer to my other video in which I put makeup on my face. As always, have a great day, and make it rainbow-tastic. Bye.